Hi, I'm Emilio. I'm a program manager at Google. Right now, lots of people are looking for ways to learn new job skills. That's why we created Google Career Certificates, an online training program for fast-growing fields like IT support, project management, data analytics, user experience design, and more. You don't need any prior experience, and you can be job ready in about 6 months. So put your skills to work. Go to grow.google/certificates.
Are you in a leadership role trying to figure out how to convince others to change their mind? Have you ever wondered why is leading and influencing others so darn hard? Are you looking for practical answers to these two vital questions? If so, welcome to my podcast, Closing the Gap with Denise Cooper. I'm your host, Denise Cooper, and I am a storyteller. I interview thought leaders and people just like you who are learning and practicing the art and expanding on the science of leadership. Listen as my guests and I talk about what it takes to be a remarkable leader in the 21st century. If you've been following me on some of my other platforms as a guest or podcast host or in my speeches, then you know that I have upped the conversation around HR and their ability to lead during disruptive times. Well, I've also talked to an increasing number of executives who are quietly disturbed that we have not made more progress in the area of women and diversity. And can you imagine my conversations with them when I say that according to the World Economic Forum, it's going to take over 200 years for women to reach a level of equality in terms of pay and equity in the workplace. You can imagine what that is for Black women or people of color, women of color, as well as Black men who fall even lower on that scale. Well, I wanted to do something about it. And so on May 17th, I'm hosting the first ever HR Masterclass. And during this masterclass, which is 3 hours in partnership with the Charlotte SHRM, together, the participants and I are going to dig deep on the area of leading during disruptive times. So if you're concerned about your leadership skills, the leadership skills of your executives that you are business partners with, or your team, on how we're going to step up and break the cycle so that we can create high-performing, inclusive workplaces, join me on May 17th for a 3-hour training so that we can figure this out and together we can close the gap. I met our next guest, Ian Chisholm, in my work as a mentor for an organization here in Charlotte called Innovate Charlotte. Innovate Charlotte has a vision to have a dynamic and thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem within the greater Charlotte area. They recruit mentors who will work with founders to help them scale their business. Ian was a speaker there, and I was so impressed with him. I thought, you have to hear his story. You have to understand what it means to be a mentor. Originally hailing from Saskatchewan, Ian Chisholm and his partner in life and business, Anne Marie Daniels, formed the Roy Group in 2004. The Roy Group is a boutique leadership development firm focused on equipping a complex world with its next generation of leaders, whom Ian calls mentors. Ian was a former CEO in Europe. He guided the challenging operational startup of award-winning Columbia 1400 International Leadership Center on the Isle of Skye, Scotland. It was on Skye where Ian co-created the Gemini Project, which brought together executive leaders from the UK's financial sector with young leaders from the tough socioeconomic realities of Glasgow. The Gemini Project became a fixture in the leadership development initiatives of Ernst & Young, Halifax Bank of Scotland, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and Lloyd's TBS. Prior to his adventure on the Isle of Skye, Ian served as the Director of Programs for the Operational Enterprise, a division of the American Management Association International headquartered in New York City. It was here that Ian and his team played an integral role with the United States Postal Service of bringing young talent from the inner city to experience a formal leadership development program. His greatest fulfillment comes from seeing the impact in communities where honorable people from all walks of life cross the threshold from leadership to mentorship. Listen as Ian and I talk about the essence of what it takes to be a great mentor. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and hearing the sound of my voice. You are listening to Closing the Gap with Denise Cooper. And this is a place where you have aspirations. You come, you listen to my guests, and they help you understand where you are now and where you want to be. And then we try to give you actionable items on how to close the gap and so that you can live the most remarkable life that you can. I want to start this podcast with something interesting. We live in these times right now where we seem to be polarized. And then my clients and the people that I talk to, some of them have a fear of saying the wrong thing because we don't know what's going to happen. And it breaks relationships. It causes strife in the workplace. It's just tough. And as you know, I recently published a book, Remarkable Leadership, Change Results One Conversation at a Time. And it's filled with ideas on what you can do to take ideas to the next level. Well, my guest today is Ian Chisholm, and he is the co-founder of the Roy Group up in Vancouver. And today, he and I are going to talk specifically about navigating tough conversations and what we can do, what you can do, how you can learn to up your game on building stronger relationships that allow you to work with people who are very different than you or have no reason to work with you, which basically is kind of the workplace, isn't it? So with that, Ian, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
I am honored and thrilled that you're here with me. So I always like to start with a little bit of the person in it. But when I looked at your background, obviously it's exceptional in terms of what you've done and the organizations that you've had impact in. But it left me wondering, how did you get into this work? And how would you describe it to somebody you met on the bus?
Well, the answer of how I got into this work is very simple, and that's that I didn't get into med school.
Okay.
And instead, because I was in a bit of a void, I had worked in the summers before university with the American Management Association, and they picked me up as an intern, and I was able to kind of pivot from university and just start a very entry-level job with the American Management Association, thinking that I would just kill a few years until I could regather and do what I thought I was meant to do. And of course, where I landed was full of incredible people, and I loved the work and I loved the difference that it made. And here I am almost 30 years later.
And so if you met somebody on the bus, how would you describe what it is you do?
I guess what I normally say on the bus to people is that I do leadership development, but there's a lot of people, including a lot of good managers and bosses doing leadership development every day. So that's what I say. But if I was specific about the work that we do, it's really helping leaders make that transition from being a leader to being a mentor. And I personally just get a lot of energy and satisfaction from seeing people cross that threshold and kind of have that other aspect as part of their weekly efforts.
When you say that, are there some people who shouldn't be leaders or mentors?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. Like everything, you mentioned polarization, and I'm sure that our human history is littered with examples of people that had an incredible influence on somebody else that made them a worse person. Yeah,
so what are the qualities of what we should say as a good leader? Because leadership, you're right. The leadership industry is some $180 billion market only in the US alone here. So it's huge. And there's a lot of people out here, quote unquote, teaching leadership skills.
Sure.
But I don't know that we often step back to say, what is the job of a leader? What is the criteria to be a leader? How should we be selecting leaders in organizations, whether they're for-profit, not-for-profit, or public sector? Let's start way back and why should we develop these folks? What's in it for us? So talk from that perspective of what's the quality? What is it that we're trying to achieve?
Well, I think, every generation has this responsibility to look at the generation that's coming after it and identify and help to develop those people that are going to create the most good. And they're going to create the most good first and foremost by being highly aware of themselves and the impact that they have and the potential for impact that they have. That's, I think, what we notice first if we're trying to help somebody become a leader. The second step is about making it very, very clear that it's a choice. Leaders aren't born. I don't even know if they're made. I know that some people choose it, even though it's not an easy road.
Mm-hmm.
In its finest form, it's about sacrifice and service, more so than status and being impressive.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I think we watch for people who are able to occupy the ground. And what I mean by that is that there's something about the way that they conduct themselves, that even when things are uncomfortable or moving sideways, they're very solid and steady. And while everyone else is seeing the world through an adrenaline-fueled fog, they're still able to maintain that poise under pressure. Mm-hmm. And then we notice them affecting the field, the things they say and the things they do, not only in the prime moments, but in the in-between moments, because we're always watching each other. That's how human beings learn, is that we just pick up on little cues, little signals about who people really are. So we watch for somebody with a set of behaviors that really makes good things happen. And lastly, we know that the only thing that a leader ever leaves behind is a story, a collection of stories. And so in looking to the generations coming up next, we pay attention to who are these people that have begun that process of unfolding incredible stories in the world. That normally gives us some criteria for who we're looking for. Mm-hmm. And then the process starts of developing them to be more and more and more of who they've always been.
That's very interesting. I like to say is the stories are, remarks. And who are we constantly quoting and saying and emulating, because we learn how to be with each other by what we watch and see how you treat other people.
Of course.
In the process. And I want to go back a little bit, because one of the things you said was that we want to see people, we should be looking for people who are about doing good. Mm-hmm. And we live in a time when it's kind of fuzzy over what is good. I mean, we've got people for and against climate change, whether it's real or not real. In my country, you've probably heard about it, whether it's George Floyd and the way the police treat marginalized or traditionally diverse communities, even down to how much money should a CEO make in comparison to. And so this compass of what is good is a little blurry right now.
Yeah, it's true. And it would be wonderful if we had some way to measure it, just a temperature that would tell us, is this for the sake of good in the world, or is this for the sake of making things worse for the people around us? There's only two glimpses that I've ever had into measurement. Mm-hmm. One was the example of Nelson Mandela. Mm-hmm. And there's something about what happened inside him over the course of those 27 years on Robben Island, that somehow he developed a capacity in his heart to care deeply for millions of people. Mm-hmm. I would say, a continent of people. And I think that's a very interesting measurement that separates for me to see who are the people that I want to follow and who are the people that I don't want to follow, is how many people is their heart capable of caring for? Mm. And if it's one, and we have some recent examples of that, I think I know how I feel about that person and whether I want to emulate them in any way or follow or trust or anything they say. When I meet somebody who over time has crafted this very deep tissue ability to actually care for hundreds or thousands or millions of people, I realize there's something there that I can emulate and learn from and try to understand more to follow. And that's one.
Okay. But if I hear you, just so that I'm clear, what you're talking about is individuals who in their heart want to see the common good, and common may not be the right point or the right word maybe, but it's this idea of the good for the whole versus the good for